Hello friends, and welcome to today's video. Ms. Johnson and I had to step out of class today for a meeting, and so since we couldn't be in class together, I wanted to create this video to help you get started with what we're going to be doing for the rest of the class period today. Earlier this week, we took some notes about the ABE writing strategy. And then we have also looked at an example of a completely written ABE response. And so now that we kind of know a little bit about what an ABE is and what it should look like, we are going to attempt to write our own ABE response. I am not going to give you this and have you just try it on your own. That's why I'm making this video today, to help you get started. So the way that this is going to work is, in this video, we are going to complete the answer, the because, and then the first E1 and the first E2 together. And for the most part, that should be just like the front side of this paper. And then when the video is over, you are going to flip your paper over to the back and you are going to attempt to answer the second E1, the second E2, and then the concluding sentence on your own. I do want to tell you that when you are ready to flip it over to the back and start working independently, to remember that we did take notes over this, like I said, and we did look at the example together. Remember, we underlined all the different parts with our different colors. So if you need something to look back on, those are places that you can go. Another thing that I want to say about this is, when Miss Johnson and I are able to be back in class with you, we're going to take a look at what you have written. And so when you feel like you are completely finished, you're going to bring it to one of us and we're going to read it and we're going to give you some feedback. Now, if you do it perfectly, everything is written in the way that we want it to be written, you are going to be done and you'll get to have some free time. But if we do give you some feedback and we tell you that there are things that you need to change, you're going to get a piece of notebook paper and we will ask you to rewrite the back part again. So that would be your second E1, your second E2, and your concluding sentence. This is going to be important to you because I am going to be grading these after you have the opportunity to rewrite them. And so you're going to want to make sure that you take the feedback that Ms. Johnson and I give you and you really do make changes so that you are able to get, the best score that you possibly can on this assignment. I hope that that all made sense. If not, we'll be back in the classroom either later today or tomorrow and you can ask us questions. But for now, we are going to jump in here and get started. You will probably want to have your copy of the Telltale Heart that we read in class open in another tab on your Chromebook here in a few minutes. So just keep that in mind, because our question today does come from the story that we read, which is the Telltale Heart. And it says, is the narrator of the Telltale Heart reliable? Support your answer with evidence from the text. We have talked about how when you are asked to write in response to a question, the expectation is that you use the ABE writing strategy. Remember, ABE stands for answer, because, evidence, explain. That is what we're looking for. So with this question specifically, we are being asked, is the narrator reliable? So before we can answer this question, we really have to know what that word reliable means. Reliable means, can we trust this narrator? Do we believe that what this narrator says is true? Is this narrator someone who we believe is telling us the truth? And then we have to support our answer with evidence from the text. Now, if we were able to be in class together, we could have some discussion about this. But since we're doing this through video, if we think about the story, remember, our narrator is trying to convince us from the very beginning that he is a completely sane person, but his actions throughout the story really don't show that. We know that eventually he commits murder, but before that, he is kind of stalking the old man in the story every night at midnight. We know he goes into his room. We also know that there were certain parts in the story where the narrator was hearing things that weren't actually there. And so for those reasons, we're going to state that the narrator of the Telltale Heart is not reliable. So on your own sheet, make sure as I am typing things on my screen, you are filling them in. Now, if we are following the Abe writing strategy, the answer part is taken care of, but I do want to point something out here. In our answer, we didn't just give 1 or 2 words. Technically, this is a yes or no question. Is the narrator reliable? But we don't just want to put yes or no. We have to restate the question that is being asked. So we said, the narrator of the Telltale Heart is not reliable. Now we have to move on to the second part of the Abe writing strategy, which is the because. Remember, the because is our justification. So we have to explain, how do we know that the narrator of the Telltale Heart is not reliable? So we're going to state, he clearly cannot be trusted because. The word because is very important here. You might want to circle it on your own paper. Again, like I just said, the B in our Abe stands for because, and when you guys are writing these Abe written responses on your own, I am going to look for that specific word. So, I have 2 blanks here because I want us to come up with 2 reasons why we cannot trust the narrator of our story. I personally think that the biggest reason that we cannot trust the narrator of our story is because of what he eventually did to the old man. We know that he murdered him. So he cannot be trusted because in the story he committed a terrible crime. So that's going to be our first reason why we cannot trust this narrator. But I actually want us to add a second reason as well. And again, if we were in class, I would love to have some discussion about this, but unfortunately we can't do that right now at this moment. So let's think back to the story and think about some of the other things that he did that showed that he is not a reliable person. The crime was definitely the worst part, but when I think about it, I specifically think about those moments leading up to the crime when he was talking about hearing the old man's heart beat so loudly that the neighbor could hear it. We know in reality that is not possible. So the second reason why I'm going to say that our narrator is not reliable is because he began hearing noises that weren't there. That is a sign that maybe he is not thinking super clearly and he is not a sane and reliable person. If you need to pause the video to copy these things down, please feel free to do so, but make sure you have everything written on your paper the way it's written on my paper. After we have answered the question and we have given our justification, we are moving on to our E1. Remember, E1 stands for evidence, so this is the part where we have to go back to the passage and we have to find something that was stated in the text that proves that our answer is true. I purposefully set up our response here in a very specific way. I actually had us list 2 reasons in the response for why our narrator is not reliable. So our first reason is he committed a terrible crime, and our second reason is that he was hearing noises that weren't actually there. Remember, when we use the Abe writing strategy, we're going to have 2 E1s and 2 E2s, so 2 pieces of evidence and 2 explanations. Since we split our answer into 2 parts, our first E1 and E2 is going to focus on the fact that this was a terrible crime, that he committed a terrible crime. So I'm going to underline this in blue, and then I'm going to underline our first E1 and E2 in blue, just to remember that this E1 and this E2 is going to focus on this topic, the fact that he committed a terrible crime. Let's underline, or I'm going to underline, you don't have to do this on your copy, our second reason in yellow, and then on the next side, this E1 and this E2 are going to focus on the fact that he was hearing noises that weren't there. So when you eventually get to the point where you're ready to do this on your own, you will be looking for evidence based on that. But since we're doing this first one together, we're going to find some evidence from the text that proves he is not reliable because he committed a terrible crime. So to find this, we would need to go back to the passage and find the piece of evidence where it talks about where he actually committed the murder. And for this, I'm going to go to paragraph number 12. I'm actually on page 5, and this is the paragraph where it all goes down. And at the end of this paragraph, this is where he actually discovers that he has been successful with what he set out to do. And it's this point right here where it says, I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. It states pretty clearly there that he has murdered the old man, which clearly supports what we were stating here, that he committed a terrible crime. Remember, when we are citing text evidence, we always want to have a good sentence starter like the text says. And then we're going to add quotation marks because this shows that this is not our words. This is evidence that came from the passage. And then as I am citing my evidence, I want to make sure that I am writing exactly what it says in the text. I'm not putting this in my own words. I'm copying this word for word from the passage. And then I put my period and I put my closing quotation marks at the end of the quote. So just to make sure I have it written correctly, the text says, quotation marks, I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. And I'm looking back at the text now because I have a paper copy in front of me, and that does match up. Again, if you need to pause the video, feel free to do that now. Now that we have our first piece of evidence proving that he cannot be trusted because he committed a crime, we have to explain, how does this evidence, the fact that he committed this murder, show that our narrator is not reliable? If you are ever struggling to come up with a good sentence starter for your E2, your explanation, a great way to start is with this evidence shows. And so if you think about it, the whole thing that we are trying to prove here is that the narrator is unreliable. So let's start with that. This evidence shows how unreliable the narrator is because it demonstrates that he is pretty crazy, right? You have to be a pretty insane person in order to commit a crime. Now, one thing that I want to point out here is that I'm not just copying what my evidence says, I'm trying to add a little more to it. So this evidence shows how unreliable the narrator is because it demonstrates that he is crazy. We need to add a little bit more. So let's pull in the fact of why he committed this crime to begin with. And we know that the reason that he did this was because of the man's eye. So let's say he committed a huge crime just because he did not like the old man's blue eye. And I will fix this so you guys can see it a little bit easier. And I think we probably need one more sentence here just driving this fact home. We know that committing a murder against someone just because you don't like something about them is not something that a reliable or sane person would do. So let's add a sentence stating that. This is not something a reliable person would do. Reliable and sane people do not commit murder just because they don't like a physical feature of someone else. A couple of things to point out about our E2 here. Remember, our E2s are in our own words, so our evidence comes from the text. Our E2s come from our brains, and it has to be at least 2 sentences. At least 2 sentences explaining how our evidence proves what our evidence, or how our explanation or evidence proves that what we said in our answer is correct. Now, I'm sorry that I had to rush through that pretty quickly. Make sure you have everything that I have typed written on your paper. And now you're going to be ready to flip your paper over to the back and try the second E1 and E2 on your own, as well as the concluding sentence. I have given you some sentence starters to get you going. And remember, with this E1 and E2, we are focused on the fact that he was hearing noises that weren't actually there. So look for some evidence that supports that. And then when you're explaining your evidence, tell me how that shows that he is not reliable. Remember, Ms. Johnson and I will be looking over these, so give your best effort because we may have to give you some suggestions on how to improve if we don't see exactly what we're looking for. Good luck.